You're listening to the Better for America podcast, presented by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rebecca Weber, and this is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. I want to talk to you a little bit about school closings today. I know that there are a lot of moms and dads that are probably very frustrated that our children are not getting the education that they need. We understand that school learning is so important and detrimental to our children's health. So we're going to speak a little bit today with AMAC's own Jeff Szymanski. He'll be joining us in just a few moments. Before we talk about school closings, I want to give you a sneak peek of the magazine and tell you a little bit of a story behind the publishing of this recent AMAC magazine. So most of you would be receiving this magazine this week. Okay, and this is what the magazine looks like. You may have received the magazine last week. I just want to share with you AMAC's major hurdles that we had to undertake, jump through, all kinds of hoops in order to get this magazine into your mailbox. But I also want to remind you, too, that we share our magazine in a digital format. So you folks can share the AMAC magazine with family and friends by simply forwarding a link to those people and let them check out our magazine digitally. Or you can give us a call and we'll be happy to ship you out a dozen magazines, for example, if you'd like to share the printed magazine. But a few things that I want to just inform you about. When AMAC printed this magazine, we went to print on January 5th. Can you imagine? We went to print on January 5th. We all know what happened on January 6th. Now, leading up to the printing on January 5th of our AMAC magazine, we had polled our members, over 2 million AMAC members. We polled you and we said to you, of the list of 12 or 15 choices I think we gave, who would you vote for Person of the Year or Man of the Year? And we gave all kinds of options, including essential workers, because essential workers, I mean, big shout out to every essential worker that has really gone above and beyond to keep our communities safe and to deliver the kind of health care that we all so need during this pandemic. But believe it or not, AMAC members chose Donald Trump as their Person of the Year or Man of the Year. That's who AMAC members chose. So we decided, because of our AMAC members who overwhelmingly chose Trump as their Person of the Year, let's put him on the cover of our magazine. Why not? It's your magazine. It's a magazine for our members. Well, can you imagine on January 6th, this was the cover, or is the cover of our magazine. Okay? Isn't that great? Beautiful picture of Donald Trump, his great face there with the flag behind him. Can you imagine this getting delivered to your home? We had to cover it with this outer wrap. We had to make sure that we put an outer cover. The reason why we did that was so that it would reach your mailboxes. I mean, can you imagine the censorship that we endure? It is absolutely something I've never seen before. In other words, AMAC's leadership team said, in order for this magazine, for us to trust that this magazine is going to be delivered in homes, we need to wrap it with a cover because we're afraid that the Postal Service will see this great picture of Trump on the cover and will toss it out. So that's the first thing I wanted you folks to understand, is that we're taking certain steps to ensure that information and news gets to you. If you're not receiving our magazine, go onto our website and be sure that you log in to receive information from us. You can go ahead and log in to your own membership if you need to change your address or any of that kind of information. If you're not receiving the magazine, give us a call. We're happy to ensure that you get that magazine. But you can also get all of this information digitally, so we can get things right into your inbox. I also want to remind you that if the book went to print, if the magazine went to the printer on January 5th, understand that articles for this February issue were written in the month of December. So when the magazine went to print on January 5th, which was before the breach at the Capitol on January 6th, Since that time, we have seen some disheartening actions on behalf of Republican leaders. Okay, I know many of you are frustrated that Vice President Pence felt that he had no constitutional authority to delay the counting of electoral votes. So I know that some of you are frustrated. I was frustrated. I was hoping that Pence would have felt that he did have constitutional authority. I respect him still, even though he felt that there was no rationale behind his authority to delay the counting of the electoral votes. So what we did in our digital magazine is we've updated our article on Vice President Pence to reflect the fact that he felt that he had no constitutional authority. In addition, and I was very, very disappointed that Republican Conference Chair Liz Cheney, she sided with Democrats to impeach President Trump. Shame on you, Liz Cheney. And we've removed her from our digital magazine. We had a nice little blurb about Liz Cheney. This is all prior to the January 6th occurrence at the Capitol building. But we took her out of our digital print. You have to understand this. We are human beings. We do our very, very best to deliver news that we believe is fair. And the opinion articles that we write, we believe are thoughtful and reflect the views of our over 2 million AMAC members. But just like you were disappointed on January 6th, AMAC was too. So keep an eye out for the digital magazine, which should be arriving in your inbox in a day or two. If you have not received it, go ahead and check your junk mail, and be sure to forward a copy of the AMAC digital magazine to friends and family, because we are your trusted resource. And AMAC is here to ensure that you get the kind of news that you won't read anywhere else. It's a great issue. It's a great magazine, both digital and print. Give us a call if you want more printed copies. In the meantime, folks, I'll be right back with Jeff Szymanski talking here today about school closings and what we can do to ensure that our children are receiving the best education at home while we're waiting for those schools to reopen. We'll be right back with Jeff. Hello, everyone. Just a quick side note. Did you know that the Better for America podcast is also available on iTunes and Spotify? Every week, an audio version of this podcast is also available for you to listen to and share. It's a fun and easy way to stay up to date with all of the latest news and the benefits that AMAC has to offer you. And if you like the show and you love AMAC, I implore you to go on over to iTunes or Spotify and subscribe to the show. Rate and review us as well. This would really help us boost our show's standing, which helps us greatly, because we want to make sure that this show is not censored. With greater recognition comes greater benefits for members like you. So please click the link below or search for us in the iTunes app. And thank you so much for listening to AMAC's podcast, Better for America. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to have with me Jeff Szymanski. Jeff actually works with AMAC, and his title with us is Political Communications. Many of you that write into us, if you're looking for AMAC's opinion on a particular political issue, it might very well may be Jeff Szymanski that responds to your email. Jeff does a tremendous amount of work with us. He writes, his work is published both in our magazine and on our website. And Jeff holds a BA in political science from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He's got a master's degree in political science from the University of Oklahoma. His background experiences are diverse, and he's worked in travel, state government, real estate, and as a high school social studies teacher for 15 years in the state of Massachusetts before he relocated to Florida. Jeff, I'm very happy to have you with us here today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Very happy. And another thing of note, you were very active in the policy realm as a budget analyst for the Rhode Island legislature. You did some fiscal research, gave testimony about revenues and expenditures to committees. So you do definitely have a very diverse background. And I like to call you our political junkie because you've got some really great insight, opinions, and real world experience in a lot of these areas. Speaking of experience, your 15 years as a social studies high school teacher is really what I want to talk to you about today, because I know that you are so passionate, Jeff, about our children and about our country's education, and specifically about keeping kids in the classroom for in-person learning. And before I jump into my first question, I want to say to you that I'm a mother of 3 children. My children are nearly grown. I've got my youngest in college. I remember being at home, working from home, because childcare was much too expensive for me to work outside of the home full time and have 3 children, pay for 3 children to have childcare. And so I had to juggle raising my children while working, doing it during nap time. And that time was very stressful. I mean, fast forward to 2020, 2021, parents are on the brink of what I call totally stressed out, because many parents, I've spoken with many, have lost their jobs. Others are trying to do their jobs from home, which has been challenging, especially when you've got these little ones, younger children, that are so demanding of our time and our energy. So my first question to you, Jeff, is really, I believe that it would be reasonable for teachers to oppose school openings if COVID-19 posed a significant risk to students. But my understanding through all the research I have done is that there isn't a great exposure to students. So why do you think teachers are opposing schools reopening? And I'm not saying all teachers, but specifically we're seeing leadership groups and political groups that are opposing the reopening of schools. What is your opinion there?
It's such a tough one. I'll tell you, nothing has had me more fired up over the past several months than the issue of schools, having taught for 15 years. I mean, it's some of the more hardened and ardent teachers unions. It's not all teachers, certainly. Some of the powerful unions do not want to go back to school. The literature, as you suggested, has been very clear. Since going back to the early days of the pandemic in early 2020, the Lancet Journal and others have said there's not significant spread. There's not significant risk of serious illness or death to children. Now, it's very different from the elderly. That's a different topic for a different day, nursing homes and such. But with kids, they should be in school, and they should have been in school, in my view, on September 1st, learning in person. And that's the way it's been in Florida, where I reside right now. And it's been very successful.
It truly is amazing what Florida has done. Yeah. And Florida, I mean, I have to just mention Florida, because Florida has done some really interesting things. And we see just this morning, I saw some statistics on California and Florida. Florida, who's keeping things much more open, is seeing a sharp decline in the number of COVID people who are testing positive for COVID. California, we're seeing the numbers decline, but they're not following the same playbook for reopening their state. And we also know early on that the science demonstrates that there's virtually no risk of severe illness or death to children. So school closures are creating incredible harm to children and to teenagers. And I think it's a long-term thing. We're going to see this thing play out in the long term. But again, I go back to that significant evidence that shows that online learning is vastly inferior to deliver good education. And virtual learning, it could even be harmful if you don't have the socioeconomic background. I again, from a personal note, right? My children, they're older now, but I raised my children in early 2000. My kids were born, and so in 2003, 2004, when I had a 6-year-old child, I could not afford a computer. So I took my son to go to the local library to do a lot of his work. But thank God I was able to get in a car and go to the local library. There are children that are very disadvantaged, and I call those children that are not as fortunate to have maybe a 2-income household. Maybe you've got single parenting that definitely presents a much greater, I guess there's an unfairness there, because not all children have the same resources, and not all families have the same ability to teach children at home. In your opinion, because a lot of people say, well, they're learning from home. In your opinion, what are some of the benefits of in-class learning that virtual learning or learning from home just cannot deliver?
Well, I mean, it's night and day. I mean, teachers, those who are trying to teach under these circumstances, are certainly doing, heroic work. But there's just no substitute for in-person learning. If there were, we wouldn't need in-person learning. Look, we could close all schools down. We could learn through pinhole cameras, by watching videos and Zoom and all that. But it's not the same. An enthusiastic teacher delivering instruction, able to call on students, answer their questions. When a student gets a question answered, several other students in the class likely had that same question, the interplay. And I just think back to some of my more difficult lessons, particularly in economics, which is a difficult subject to teach and get across to, 17, 18-year-olds. I can't even fathom how I would be trying to teach those lessons in a spare room of my house through a pinhole camera, even with a whiteboard behind me, even with complicated graphs and shifts and curves and things like that. I don't even know how I would do it. Online learning has a place. I mean, to take a course here and there that way, certainly, but not for instruction. And you mentioned, lower income kids and those disadvantaged, maybe living in more rural areas. It's particularly challenging because you need really three things: fast internet connection, which you may not have in rural areas; a separate room, and if you have several kids in the household, you're not going to probably have a room for each child, and you need a laptop, an up-to-date one that can handle all this. And again, even if you have all of those, and many upper middle class and wealthier parents do, it's still no substitute for in-person learning. The older you are, maybe in college, some kind of a hybrid model is maybe not as detrimental. But, we know education in this country is the ticket to upward mobility. It's the universal great equalizer. And that's why I've really just been dumbfounded. But I'll tell you, and we're probably going to talk about this, politics played a role in this, because, when the journals came out and said kids should be in school, and the game changer being the American Society or Association, I forget what they're called, the pediatrics came out in July and says,
right,
kids need to be in school. People kind of stepped back and said, wow, I guess we should. And when the president echoed that and says, yeah, kids need to be in school, that's when the left, particularly the far left, hardened and says, no, it was to oppose Trump. So we got off of the policy, we brought politics into this, and we forgot about the science and what the experts were saying. And that is so unfortunate. And here we are in February 2021, almost a year into this, and we haven't really made much progress.
We really, really haven't, Jeff. And there are so many serious unintended consequences. Things like child abuse, for example, those things are going unreported because school personnel are the main source of reporting child maltreatment. School, social interaction that schools provide for children is so vital to their development. And when children feel isolated, it leads to depression, can lead to anxiety. I saw a report that the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, put out, and listen to this statistic: between January and October of 2020, the number of mental health related hospital visits increased by 24%, but get this, for 5 to 11-year-olds, and by 31% for 12 to 17-year-olds. This brings me to my next question. It's the lobbying groups, Jeff. It seems like it's the lobbying groups who sway government officials to support their special interests, right? So, and who are these lobbyist groups? They are the teacher unions. And it seems that the teacher unions are incentivized to lobby for themselves. But it really leads to these unintended consequences for children and their parents, because we do have so many needs, and they're ignoring the needs of the children and putting their own agenda above that of our American children that really need this education for so many different reasons. How do we combat these great teacher unions? What can average Americans do? And I want to give a little bit of guidance too for families on ways that we might be able to help, improve the education that we're giving to our kids at home, because like you, I believe that parents are number one when it comes to education. But what about these unions that are lobbying against school openings?
Yeah, that's a particular challenge because, of course, they're overwhelmingly Democrats and give to the Democratic Party. And President Biden's in a position right now where he just simply does not want to take them on and lead. I mean, if he were to come out and say we need to be in school 5 days a week and should have been for months, I tell you, Republicans would cheer him. Moderate Democrats, most parents, maybe not all, would be solidly behind him. But he just doesn't seem to have the fortitude to want to take on the unions. Unions have their place. I mean, I was taught for 15 years. I was in a union. I actually led a union. Full disclosure, was president for 4 years. But I worked through collaboration and compromise with the administration, superintendent, and the school committee. Teachers unions are there to fight for decent pay, as their members would want, and so reasonable working conditions. They should not be given the task of deciding when schools would open and how many children they could have in their class. Look, if I got to pick that, I would have chose a class of 15 students. That's not always possible. Class size usually around 25, 26. So they're trying to lobby for things for which they really, look, if we weren't going to do in-person learning in 2020, 2021, what we all really should have done is just said, look, we're in a pandemic. Let's take a year off. Everybody go home for 1 year. I don't advocate this because we'd be a year behind. But also, we're not going to pay teachers. So we should have taken a little bit tougher line and said, we're not going to pay people to teach through a pinhole camera. We're going to have in-person learning and we're not going to have any learning. But to try to make believe that this is working for all kids, kind of what we're doing now, is so ineffective. And I think many students are simply a year behind anyway, as they try to muddle through this process.
Yeah. And all children, and we agree that all children have a right to a high quality education, and adults have a moral obligation to make sure that this happens. I think it's morally wrong to ask children to bear what I call is a very disproportionate burden, right? Because of the epidemic. So we're putting that burden on our children. And I think that these school closures are especially harming our children. I don't think online teaching is a good substitute. And we see that disadvantaged children are at greater risk because they don't have the same access to those online learning tools that other families may have. So I think these lockdowns specifically harm the working class more so. Unless you've got a good natural ability to teach, you've got a tremendous amount of patience, and you've got the resources, i.e. money, to deliver the proper tools to your child to learn. Working families are really, really struggling with this. What can we do, Jeff, to encourage working moms and dads who are at the same time trying to give their kids an in-home education? How can they, are there any tips that you can offer as a teacher yourself, as an educator yourself, whether it be for our very young children or even our middle-aged children, middle school children that are probably going bonkers from having to stay home so much?
Yeah. Well, given that in our country, education is really a state issue, and it's, of course, locally administered, through school committees and school boards, they need to put pressure on their local officials and their state officials, particularly state legislators and state senators. Calling your congressman or U.S. senator on this one probably isn't going to do as much good because education is not really a federal function, though certainly I would like the president to come out and really lead on this issue and take on education as being so important and in-person learning being so important. So they need to call the legislators. I reminded back around Thanksgiving time, and I wrote about this in the AMAC magazine, which is out this month, that Bill de Blasio in New York City, the mayor, made a deal with the teachers unions that said, if we ever get above 3%, we'll immediately close the schools down as they tried to reopen. And it took just above 3%. So he made good on his promise. The problem with that is the transmission in the schools was 0.19%. As we talked about earlier, this virus just does not transmit as well or as fast among children, and it's certainly nowhere near as virulent among children. So, but parents spoke up at that time, and they were outraged, and they demonstrated, and they called, and within a week and a half, the schools reopened. So parents are a powerful force. I mean, after all, they're paying the mayor's salaries, the teacher's salaries through the local tax revenues. So parents really could be a force. I know many have, or they're kind of beside themselves on what to do, and they want their kids in school. And the economy can't recover either, because as we mentioned before, among many working class, lower middle class, families, that means somebody has to stay home if you're going to have 2-3 kids, particularly if they're younger kids, trying to learn online. You can't leave a 5-year-old to learn by themselves in a house or an apartment. So it has consequences beyond just the child, as if those aren't devastating enough, and they are.
That's right. I also want to encourage people how great reading to your children and even reading with an older child. You can learn so much just through listening skills, developing listening skills, but it's also a time for parents to interact with children and to read aloud. That is one thing that I had the great benefit of with my grandparents. They read to me constantly. We read to one another. We would open up a book and we'd talk about it. We'd read a book together, whether it be fiction or nonfiction. I think the power of reading is tremendous. And I think that just being reminding your children that they do have, because kids are struggling. And I think about my own family members, like my nieces and my nephews that have been struggling. And I think just encouraging them and reassuring them that the grades that we're seeing over the last 12 months, let's go a little easier on our kids and say, you know what, maybe they just aren't able to get all of this information the same way that they can in a face-to-face learning situation. But we're doing the best we can as a country. I just wish that we would see our states really understand that there are so many children that are just not getting the resources that they need to have at home in order to get some sort of education. And that's what breaks my heart is I see these children that rely on schools for a healthy lunch, for example. Maybe they're not getting the same. The numbers are staggering. It's hard to almost believe that children are starving because of school closings, but that is a reality. And it's a reality across the globe. So I hope that we see we can always pray that we see courage come out of the White House, but we do need a leader who needs to stand up and say, you know what, it is time for us to reopen schools. Extending the lockdown over an indefinite period of time, I think just multiplies all of the harms that we've discussed. And I think that was great advice, Jeff. People need to get involved, contact your school, talk to leadership. Call your senators, call your congressmen, write letters, and let your voice be heard. AMAC is for reopening of schools, and we know that it's science-based, Jeff. I mean, this isn't just an opinion; yes. It's backed up by science.
Indeed, and just to echo your point on reading, I can't think of anything more important. That's how you build vocabulary. That's how you build knowledge. Growing up, maybe it was the same for you. It was for me. People used to say, turn the TV off. Yes. Now it's put those phones away, because those phones are such a distraction. You see so many people down like this and walking around. And I used to joke with my students, you're going to bump into each other. And they did in the hallways when I was teaching back then. But, and just one more point on science, I wanted to mention, because I wrote about this in the magazine this month too. CDC data, talked about, a death rate of 51 children aged 5 to 14 as of last month. Succumb to COVID-19. And of course, then you might say, well, one death is too many. Well, one death is too many for any illness. Right. But when you look at suicides, death in accidents, fires, for goodness sakes, who would have thought about fires? I mean, the list goes on. We're focused on the wrong things. And actually, flu in kids, not in adults and particularly elderly, but flu is actually more deadly. So the experts tell us coronavirus will be around probably forever. I mean, the vaccines are important. That's going to definitely be a major game changer, but it's not going away. It's going to mutate. It's going to change. How long do we go on? Do we keep schools closed forever? There's no such thing as 100% safety. So we have to try to mitigate. I mean, certainly wearing masks at a time like this. There are things we could do, should be doing. And in some places like Florida, we are, and we're being very successful. It's just, I'm just not sure why it's taken so long when the science is so clear. I mean, 51, children compared to, look at the other age brackets. It's just a very different demographic. And we have really let a histrionic, I call them a liberal media mob, sort of, dictate education policy. And it never should have happened.
Yeah. And it is the sad truth. It is a liberal media mob. There's a lot of people playing politics, a lot of people that went directly against any type of recommendation or opinion that Donald Trump had as president. And it's a shame when you see our children being used as sort of pawns in this political game. AMAC is going to continue to share information and news as we uncover it. And I encourage people to check out our website. Jeff, thank you for all of your great contributions. Look forward to seeing more of your articles on our website. People love you. Thank you for all you do with AMAC. And thank you again for being with us today on AMAC's podcast, Better for America. Jeff Szymanski, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Better for America podcast. To To learn more about AMAC and all it has to offer, visit us at www.amac.us.